Well, good evening, everyone. It's very strange to actually be giving a lecture online in this way. Um, it's different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this. We have a slideshow, and I'm going to share it, and everyone should be able to see it on their screen. Okay. So the Kingdom of Kerry is renowned worldwide for its scenic beauty spots and historic buildings. But did you know it also boasts some of the oldest and rarest trees in Ireland? From the long-lived Moccas yew to the Arbutus and Desmond's oak tree in Glendor and Parnell's beech tree near Listowel. Trees are an important part of the heritage of County Kerry. Spanning centuries of human history, these heritage trees are an often overlooked part of the nation's heritage, despite providing a living link to the past. One of the oldest trees in Ireland stands in Moccas Abbey in Killarney, and the Moccas yew has been a source of curiosity for visitors to Killarney for hundreds of years. Standing 55 feet tall, it grows directly in the centre of the cloister at Moccas Abbey and is said to have been planted at the time of the abbey's construction by the Franciscans in 1448. This makes it 570 years old. Now, typically there is some disagreement about the date in historical sources of the founding of the abbey, because the Four Masters gives its foundation as a century earlier, 1340. And this would mean that the tree is actually 660 years old. And some accounts, and trust us in Kerry to behave exactly like that, some accounts make it even older than that again, with tradition holding that it was brought as a sapling from Inishfallen Island in the 12th century, when the community of monks there grew too big and it expanded to a new site at Moccas. Yew trees are noted for their long lifespan, and a lifetime of several centuries is not uncommon. However, without counting the growth rings on a tree, it is impossible to accurately date its age. In the case of the Moccas yew, it is believed that the younger of the dates is more accurate, because the tree is rooted in debris, making it younger than the site, which was occupied by monks at various points in history. In its younger days, it would have borne witness to the persecution of the monks who lived and prayed in its shade. It survived the raid on the abbey by Elizabethan soldiers in 1589, when the valuable chalices and silver bell were secreted away and thrown into the lake to avoid their loss to the English troops. Two friars, Father Donagh O'Murhilly, the sacristan, and a companion were captured and put to death. The friars later returned, but in the face of persecution from the Cromwellians, they fled to the mountains and hid in a wild place near Top Waterfall called the Friars' Glen for their safety. Whatever account of the yew tree's age is correct, this famous yew tree is as much part of the very structure of the abbey as the stones within its walls. The owner of Moccas in the 19th century, Henry Herbert, took over the abbey and had the heaps of bones and skulls to be found all over the place, buried in large pits. The abbey, which gave its name to his famous residence, Moccas Abbey, now known as Moccas House, and its yew tree became a popular visitor attraction among tourists visiting Killarney. It regularly featured in guidebooks and the writings of travellers from the mid-18th century on. The renowned agriculturalist Arthur Young described the veteran tree in 1776 as, and I'm quoting him here, "the most prodigious yew tree I ever beheld, in one great stem, from whence its branches spread on every side so as to form a perfect canopy to the whole place. Legend holds that it is bad luck to touch the tree, which was associated with many tales. One account states that there was a miraculous image of the Virgin Mary buried underneath its roots, and anyone who laid their hand on the tree would die within the year. A soldier who disregarded this warning hacked off a branch, and seeing blood dripping from the tree, he fell dead on the spot." The yew trees are known to live to a remarkable age, and a common yew tree growing outside Moccas Abbey and another yew on Inishvallen Island in Killarney are both reckoned to be several hundred years old. You also have a pair of yew trees growing in the wall garden in Dunlow Castle Hotel. They were formerly in the wall garden of what was Dunlow Castle, where the O'Mahanys lived. And there's one male and one female yew tree, and for generations they've been known as Adam and Eve. The common yew is a species native to Ireland and frequently appears in place names across the county, such as Ahedo, the field of the two yew trees, and Knockanure in North Kerry, which means the hill of the yew tree. Queen Victoria, on her visit to Killarney in August 1861, visited the yew tree. The reigning monarch of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland and the Empress of India came to Killarney in what was a landmark visit, accompanied by her husband, Prince Albert, and their children. The Queen was entertained at Killarney House by the Earl of Kenmore and later stayed with the Herbert family at Moccas House. Her trip put Killarney on the tourist map, with news and views of her itinerary appearing in newspapers all over the world. This sketch here of Moccas House appeared in the Illustrated London News. Her visit was the social highlight of the century for Kerry people of all classes, who flocked to Killarney to catch a glimpse of the royal celebrities. Now, the Herberts went to considerable expense fitting out their residence ahead of her stay and laid out a new avenue and approach road to the house, known ever since as the Queen's Drive. A short distance along this road from the house, at a junction with the road leading to the old stable yard, is a plantation of several mature trees, including 2 oaks, a copper beech, and a magnificent cedar of Lebanon. These were planted by Queen Victoria during her 2-day stay at Moccas and were deemed to be landmark enough to appear on subsequent Ordnance Survey maps as the Queen's trees. Only 2 oak trees remain of the original 6 which he planted, augmenting what it would seem were even older trees at the site, namely 3 veteran sweet chestnut trees of enormous girth. The Queen's trees are more than mementos commemorating her visit to Killarney, because they hark back to a key moment in the development of the town and its lake hinterland as a popular tourist destination. Another tree associated with her visit is, just in passing, is of the Royal Oak, which is located in Toomey's Wood on the far side of Loch Lane. And it was under that oak tree that the Queen had a picnic during her stay. This tree here stands outside the cathedral in Killarney, and it's a giant redwood tree. And during the Queen's reign, you had one of the biggest events of her reign was the Great Famine, and the untold destruction which the Irish population suffered. A population of 8 million people was decimated, with 1 million dying of hunger and disease and 1 million more emigrating. The devastation of the famine is actually recalled on this tree, because the giant redwood tree outside the cathedral is actually grows on the site of a children's burial ground, which was in use during the famine. The redwood stands over 100 feet tall, and it is reckoned to have been planted in 1912 to mark the completion of the cathedral. And the construction of the cathedral again itself had begun around the time of the famine, and construction ceased in 1848. So when it was completed in 1912, it seems the giant redwood tree was planted. Now the tree is known today as the Tree of Light, and it's famously lit up every Christmas. It's become kind of iconic and synonymous with Christmas in Killarney. And indeed, its place in Kerry history continues to the present day, because during the COVID-19 lockdown, the tree was lit up in support of the frontline workers. So much of the county's history can be told through its heritage trees. A great oak tree growing by the roadside in Glownaginty is said to mark the spot where Gerald Fitzgerald, the last Earl of Desmond, was killed. This is an Ordnance Survey map from the 1890s, and you can see that it states clearly on it the Earl of Desmond's grave and place where he was killed in 1583. The Desmond dynasty had been powerful overlords in Munster, whose authority at times had challenged that of the English crown in the province. The Earl was branded a traitor by Queen Elizabeth I, and hid out in the wild woods and mountains of Kerry for fear of being captured. And he was eventually captured at Glendor on the 11th of November 1583. The Earl was hiding out in a cabin when he was surprised by a man named O'Moriarty. This is a depiction of his capture. O'Moriarty had come from the Mahories, where his cattle had been stolen by some of Desmond's followers, who ill-treated his sister and left her stripped naked in a field. So O'Moriarty swore revenge, and with a small group of followers, he tracked the Earl down to his hiding place with the intent of handing him over to the authorities and claiming the rewards for his capture. When they burst into the cabin, the Earl of Desmond was wounded so severely that he couldn't walk, so his captors were forced to carry him. Now, they had got so far when they could carry him, they decided they would carry him no further. And fearful that the Earl's supporters would find him and rescue him, O'Moriarty ordered one of his companions, named O'Kelly, to cut off the Earl's head, which he promptly did. The place where this took place is in the shadow of the oak tree in the picture here on the left-hand side. And this road in Glendor is known as Óthar an Iarla, the road of the Earl. So O'Kelly, the man who cut off the Earl's head, received £20 for a pension a year for his deed, but he did not live long enough to enjoy it, because he swung from the gallows at Tyburn in London for highway robbery. Meanwhile, O'Moriarty was plagued with guilt for his part in Desmond's killing. He was later hanged at his own door by Lord Kerry. So writing back in the 1840s, John O'Donovan noted from local knowledge that the oak tree by the roadside was identified as the place where he was killed. His captors fled with the Earl. The Earl's captors fled with his head, which was sent to London, leaving his body by the side of the road. And this was temporarily buried by friends in a grave opposite the oak tree, at a site now occupied by the monument. And John O'Donovan noted in the 1840s that a few suckers from a large tree, which is now decayed, and which was, they say, planted there for memorial, could still be seen.
Okay.
The Earl's headless body was later exhumed from his temporary resting place shortly after his death and reinterred at Kilnanama graveyard near Castle Island. Now, aside from this oak tree, which harks back to the death of the last Earl of Desmond, his death is also commemorated in the place name Glendor, which means in Irish the Glen of the Morning, and this name is said to come about from the belief that the wind wailing through the glen mourns the last Earl of Desmond. The Earl's lands, which amounted to over 300,000 acres, were confiscated by the English Crown and granted out to English and Welsh settlers during the plantation of Munster. This established a new social order with religious undertones, which persisted right through the centuries that followed, and was the cause of great unrest in Irish history.
I'm just in. Would you believe it?
Sorry. So through the various plantations and land confiscations during the 16th and 17th centuries, much of the land of Ireland came to be vested in the ownership of an absentee landlord class. This situation changed in the 19th century thanks to Irish nationalist leader Charles Stewart Parnell, who fought with a constitutional path rather than a violent path for the passing of the Land Acts and other legislation in Westminster to protect the rights of tenant farmers here in Ireland and enable the sale of the land to those who lived on and worked it. Parnell paid a number of visits to Kerry, the last on the 13th of September 1891, only a few weeks before his death. He addressed an immense crowd on that occasion in the Listowel town square and repeated his famous remarks made in Cork 6 years before. He said, "No man has the right to fix the boundary to the march of a nation." The uncrowned King of Ireland, as Parnell was known, stayed at Kenmore House on that occasion with his close friend and fellow MP, Pearse Mahoney. On that occasion, Parnell planted a copper beech tree, which still stands in Kilmorna to this day. Now, Kenmore House was one of the grandest houses in the county, It was it was known locally as the castle, it seems, and was burned down during the War of Independence in 1921 when its occupier, Sir Arthur Vickers, the former Ulster King of Arms, was shot dead by the IRA on suspicion of being a spy. And it's remarkable that there's no trace of the mansion house in Kenmore, no trace of all the gardens and pleasure grounds that stood around it. All that is there today is a green field and one tree, Parnell's tree, standing in the field on its own. Now, during the 18th and 19th centuries, the planting of trees was highly fashionable among the nobility and gentry. The great oak and beech trees to be found in the green in Tralee, also known to outsiders from Tralee as the town park, but it's known to locals as the Green. The Green was originally part of the pleasure grounds of the castle, which once stood in the town. Hence you have Castle Street in Tralee. And the trees were planted by the town's owners, the Dennies, who were granted the seigneury of Tralee by Queen Elizabeth I as part of the Munster plantation. During the 1700s, the parkland of the castle included a long ash walk, a fir grove, and an orchard. And Charles Smith noted in 1752 a large plantation of old fruit and timber trees. In 1826, Sir Edward Denny agreed to the removal of the castle to make way for the construction of Denny Street. Now, his successor, Edward, planted many trees in the green. He made walks and constructed an ornamental grotto, which can be seen at the back of Chimsatira. He later sold, now during the time of the Dennies, the green was open to access by the public and was free. But when the Dennies disposed of the Tralee, they were purchased by, the green was purchased by Henry Clements Finnerty, and he closed the green to the public and charged 2.5 for admission. This continued then until 1922, when his son sold the green to Tralee Urban Council, and they opened it to the public as the town park. Now, many old trees of many varieties stand in the park. And this is a picture taken in the 1930s from the air, Britain from the air, some fantastic website. And you can see there's actually livestock in the green at the back, in the background. And there's also a venerable oak tree here as well, which is near the public toilets. That oak tree is still to be seen. It's of a massive size. And no doubt it's probably one of the original trees in the green. This is a map, again, then from the 1840s, on which it's marked as the Castle Green. Now, in one section of the green are 32 trees. This was a project which was begun a number of years ago, and each of the trees represent an All-Ireland football title won by Kerry. Now, Kerry have since won more All-Ireland titles, 5 more, according to Google, if that's correct. So there's more planting needs to take place. In Killarney, hundreds of thousands of trees planted in the late 1780s by the Arbutus of Moccas House and the Earls of Kenmore are now to be enjoyed along with the native and oak woodlands in the park. Now, the Browns and the Herberts both owe their origins back to the plantations in the beginning of the 17th century and before that. Most of their property now forms part of Killarney National Park. So the Herbert family resided in Moccas House until its sale by the Standard Life Assurance Company in 1899. The Herberts had planted hundreds of thousands of trees in Killarney in their time, and roughly about 200 years ago, they planted thousands and thousands of trees in Top Mountain, such as Scotch fir, oak, ash, and sycamore. And so if you visit Top Waterfall today, many of the trees that are standing there were planted at that time. They also replaced the wood of Comies around 1805 with over 49,000 3-year-old oak trees. And they established a nursery. And a nursery was also established on the Earl of Kenmare's estate. And in 1811, it was recorded that they propagated over 1 million trees. Now, these trees were propagated from seed from the old woods of Killarney. Now, Killarney, the national park, is unique because there are remnants of ancient woodland there. And this ancient woodland would have been harking back thousands and thousands of years and would have been the original woodland that would have covered most of the country. And it was said at that time that a squirrel could travel from Kerry to Derry without touching the ground. Now, many of the trees propagated by the Earls of Kenmore at that time, at the start of the 19th century, were birch, sycamore, ash, holly, beech, and rowan. And they used suckers from all elm and lime trees, which were also grown on as new trees. Now, the Killarney National Park was made up of both the holdings, both of the former estates of the Earls of Kenmore and the Herberts of Moccas. So in 1899, when the Herberts left Moccas House and the Moccas estate, it was purchased by Lord Dillon of the Guinness brewing family. And he later sold it to William Bowers Bourne, a wealthy American, who purchased Moccas as a wedding present for his only child, Maud, on her marriage to Arthur Rose Vincent. Now, Mr. Vincent served as a Justice of the Peace, a Deputy Lieutenant, and as High Sheriff of Kerry in 1915. This was before independence. And following Irish independence and the establishment of the Irish Free State, he served as a senator in the Channel. When his wife Maud died in 1929, 3 years after that, Senator Vincent and her parents-in-law gifted the 4,300-acre Moccas estate to the nation in her memory to be enjoyed by the public. This was known then as the Bourne-Vincent Memorial Park, and that forms the nucleus of Killarney National Park, which was the first national park in Ireland. It extends across the mountains and lakes of Killarney today, covering over 26,000 acres. And that it also includes, as I said, the former estates of the Earls of Kenmore. The last Earl of Kenmore, Earl, died without issue in the 1950s, and he was succeeded by his niece, Beatrice Grosvenor. And in 1959, she sold the property to John McChain, a wealthy building contractor from Philadelphia. And it was in turn his family who presented the estate to the Irish nation, which included Killarney House, Ross Castle, and Innisfallen Island. The park contains oak and yew woodlands, which are of international importance. As I mentioned already, the oak woodlands found in Killarney National Park at Derrycunnihy and on the slopes of Sheehy and Tummy's mountains are of immense importance because they are remnants of that ancient woodland which once covered most of Ireland. The yew woodlands as well, which are to be found at Reenadinna, there's 62 acres of a natural yew woodland there. And natural yew woodland is very rare because yew is very, very rarely a tree that's dominant in the woods. And Reenadinna is located between Moccas Lake and Loch Lown. It is the only such woodland of its type in Ireland and is one of just 3 pure yew woodlands in the whole of Europe. So the park has a number of rare and unique plants, among them the Arbutus, which is shown on the stamp on the left here. It's also known as the strawberry tree from the colour of its fruits. Though found in abundance in Killarney, it is rare in the rest of Ireland and is only found in the southwest of the country and in Spain and Portugal as well. Now in Killarney, because of the climate, the Arbutus can grow to a small tree, sometimes 12 metres high, but its counterparts on the Iberian Peninsula in Europe can generally only grow shrubs. This broad-leaved evergreen has a red berry, and it's from that it gets its name. The Arbutus is often referred to also as the eternal tree. So visitors to Killarney over the centuries again would have written of the Arbutus, and there were accounts by visitors in the 18th and 19th centuries describing how the Arbutus grew out of rocks, solid rocks, and also to be found along the cliffs. There's a very fine example, I'm told, of the Arbutus growing near the tunnel on the Kenmore Road. It also, Queen Victoria would have seen the Arbutus when she came to Killarney. There was also a furniture making industry in Killarney using the wood of the Arbutus, and there are some beautiful examples of furniture with inlaid designs in it. And also the Arbutus inspired poets such as Percy Bysshe Shelley, who stayed in Killarney. There were many trees. The Leslies estate in Tarbert has many trees, and one of these trees is known as one of these trees to be found in Tarbert is known as the wishing tree. Now it's located at the gate leading into Leslie's house. The gate opposite, it's opposite the gate leading into Tarbert House, and is situated on the Ferry Road. Now the tree, it is believed, is at least 200 years old because it's actually built into the wall along the estuary and at the side of the road. And this wall was built along with the road back in the 1830s by the Inland Steam Navigation Company, who operated a steamboat passenger service between Kilrush and Limerick City. At that time, beginning of the 19th century, Tarbert was one of the main entry points to Kerry, and many well-known personalities such as William Wordsworth would have alighted at Tarbert on their travels to the kingdom. Tarbert was a busy port in the mid-19th century, and its decline was actually linked to the coming of the railways in North Kerry, because the railways afforded a quicker means of getting the agricultural produce and other produce like fish and also livestock as well to distant markets. So the whole economic centre of activity in North Kerry actually shifted inland towards places like Listowel with the coming of the railways, and Tarbert went into decline. So the tree, as I said, its root, the wall was actually built to accommodate the tree, and you can see on the wall how that was done. There are actually even stones embedded in the tree. As the tree grew larger, the stones are actually in the trunk at its base. So, sorry, no. The name, the wishing tree, is a very interesting one, and its origins are steeped in romance. As far back in the 1880s, Tarbert was, and it was in use. The name, the wishing tree, was in use as far back as the 1880s. At that time, Tarbert was the permanent station of a guard ship of the Royal Navy, HMS Valiant, and this was on permanent duty to protect the south of Ireland and was stationed out in the bay at Tarbert. Now, the sailors on the ship would have had to land at the pier on Tarbert Island and come in along the ferry road to go to the village. And the maids in Tarbert House, it was said, would come down on their breaks and sit around the wishing tree and wish that they would marry one of the handsome sailors on the ship out in the bay. And it seems local marriage records actually back up this story, because it has been found in the 1880s that up to 12 marriages between local women and sailors from HMS Valiant took place. In more recent times, the tree upheld its reputation among local teenagers as a wishing tree, who left coins on its trunk and made a wish. Now, the tradition of money and fairy trees often comes up in Irish folklore. And there's an example in Rathmore, in the Rathmore area, which was recorded in the 1930s by the school's folklore commission. And school children there wrote of a tree in the neighbourhood called Crown and Arrogate, which means, from Irish, the money tree. And there's also a story of money associated with trees growing in a fairy fort in Finoog. Back in the 19th century, this story was said to this. It was related that there was a milkmaid. I'm just gone astray on my notes. There was a milkmaid milking a cow. She worked at Finoog House for the Hewson family. She was originally one of the Sheehans, whose thatched house is actually at the crossroads in Finoog. So one evening she was milking a cow near the fort known as Lisnaburhee, which means the fort of the Spancels. So she was milking her cow by hand, and whatever look she gave, she saw a whole hoard of gold between the roots of one of the trees growing in the fort. So she decided to take the spancel off the cow she was milking. Spancel was used to stop the cow from moving, and she tied it and from kicking, and and she tied it around the tree so that she would know where the gold was. In the meantime, she decided to go in and bring her master to show him the gold. When they came back, there was a spencil on all of the trees in the fort. So the fort was ever after known as Lisnaburhi, the Fort of the Spencils. No, just to mention, where's the rag trees? Across the country as well, at Holy Wells, there are many examples of rag trees. Now, there was quite a lot of them recorded in the 1930s by the school's folklore collection, but sadly, a lot of them don't exist anymore. This tree is a holly tree. It's known as the Holy Holly Tree, and it's located at Killelton, which is just outside Tralee, between Tralee and Camp. And it's an unusual custom because the trees form part of the rituals conducted at these holy wells, because people would tie a rag or trinkets such as this on the branch of the tree as part of the rites associated with visiting the well. Often the wells were associated with particular ailments of the body, and often the rags which were tied to the tree would be from clothing associated with that particular part of the body that a cure was sought for. It is believed that leaving the rag as a token offering at the well was a means of leaving the ailment there as well, once the petitioner went home. And examples of rag trees to be found are this one at Killelton, and also there's a holy well in Menard. This is an example of the trinkets at Tubber Owen, which is quite close to Menard Castle. You can see that there's actually straw hats, there's rags, there's bits of ribbons, there are rosary beads, all these kind of trinkets are found. At Tubber Flynn in Kilflynn, there was a yew tree which was used as a rag tree in the 1930s. And also in Clough-McCudda, which was located in the domain in Killarney, quite close to where Killarney House stood, there was a palm tree which was a recipient of the rag tokens. The school's folklore collection in the 1930s also records a very peculiar tale about the rag tree at Kilsyne and Holywell, which no longer survives. The story relates that Saint Senan came to the area from Scattery Island in the Shannon, and arriving at the well, he fell asleep on a stone pillow, which still bears the print of his head. The saint was said to have been woken by soldiers who put him to death by hanging him on an adjacent hawthorn tree. Now, up to that point in time, the tree had white blossoms, but after Saint Senan was hung from the tree, its flowers were ever after coloured red. So sadly, this tree, it seems, no longer exists. Now, folklore around the county also tells how trees formed a very important part in the customs associated with certain days. So, for example, at Christmas time, everyone's familiar that branches of evergreens would be brought into the house, like holly, ivy, and laurel, and these would be used to decorate the inside of the house by placing them over pictures and around the crib, or the candles lighting in the window. And traditionally, these were always taken down after January 6th, Little Christmas, and according to folklore, they were meant to be burned in the fire. Bunches of palm were always cut as well and taken to Mass on Palm Sunday to be blessed by the priest. And again, these were brought home and were hung up near holy pictures and around the house, and were thought to protect it from lightning. A branch of the summer tree, the sycamore, was also brought into the house on May Eve, April 30th, the day before the 1st of May. And this was practiced in many parts of the county and was meant to welcome the arrival of summer. On that evening also, people would go around their farms and their fields and bless them with holy water and bless the livestock to keep away the fairies and bad luck. And it was recorded the branches of the rowan tree, the mountain ash, were also placed in cow houses and stalls to bring good luck on the cows, which of course were vital in an economy which was dependent on agricultural output. And in many places, these customs continue. They certainly continue in my own home area at home. In Tralee during the 19th century, May Day was marked every year by the townsfolk, The Boherby May boys had strong ties with the Blennerhassetts of Ballyseedy and always obtained their maypole from the wood. While the festivities in the town petered out in the 1940s, the custom of May Sunday at Ballyseedy Wood continued right up to the time of the First World War, when people from the town, led by bands, would march out to Ballyseedy and enjoy games, music, dancing, and other merrymaking. There were also beers and spirits sold in tents there on these occasions, and these sometimes were scenes of drunkenness and kind of drew them into disrepute sometimes behaviour on May Sundays. And May was particularly associated, of course, with the fairies, and even in my own locality, I struggled to find an example of a fairy bush to include as in a photograph for the lecture here, because I know at home many years ago there was a fairy crab tree, and it was said which grew at a crossroads, and there were many stories associated with this crab tree, and it was said that if you stole the crab apples from the tree, that the fairies would come after you. No, there was around the county. There was a story as well in Lixnaw, just to mention trees as well, and how they were used for hanging people in earlier centuries. The folklore this is a picture, a painting of Lixnaw in the early 19th century by Cornelius Varley, and it shows the Old Court, what was known as the Cock House, and also the Kerry House, the home of the Earls of Kerry, and they lived in great splendour here in the 17th century, 17th and 18th centuries. The story is told anyway that there was a hawthorn tree growing on the farm where the Old Court is now located, up to the mid 20th century. And the story was told that one of the lords of Kerry was a very cruel man. And one day when his daughter said to him that she never saw a man hanged, he declared that the next man who would pass along the road would meet such a fate. So there was a young man named O'Connor taking cattle to the fair who fell victim to the noble lady's fancy. He was hung from the branches of the whitethorn tree in the field, and this story was recalled by school children in the Lixnaw area in the 1930s and is still remembered by locals today. Tradition holds that the Earl himself met with bad luck after this, because the story goes that he was out riding on horseback one day when he was caught around the neck by a fork in the branch of a tree and was killed. So there was also a tree known as the Round Bush growing on the banks of the River Brick in Lixnaw, where the Earls of Kerry would go swimming. And that's interesting because the place name Lixnaw again is tied back to Lixnava, the place of the flagstone of the swimming. The Old Court was the centre of a landscape garden associated with which was built by the Fitzmaurices, and there were various avenues radiating through the estate. There is a field in the townland of Portnair, which is still known today as the Avenue, and an oak tree growing on the ditch is believed to be a survivor of the original avenue of this landscape. Now, the Old Court, as I said, was a place of great splendour where the Earls of Kerry lived, and one of the ladies of Lixnaw was said to have made the comment that there were only two places in the world worth living in, London and Lixnaw. Avenues of trees were a feature of many landed estates across Ireland, and they helped to impress visitors arriving at the Great House. Arthur Young, the celebrated agriculturalist, wrote when he visited Ardfert, which is the mansion house shown in this photograph. He wrote of avenues adorned with elms and beech, and also large plantations of cider fruit and other apple trees. He visited the home of the Crosby family in Ardfert in 1776. And Dr. Beaufort noted on his visit in 1788 the shady walks, clipped arcades, and weeping willows in abundance. So among the trees in Ardfert at this time, one stood out as a landmark. This was known as Lord Glendor's tree, and he was one of the Crosby family. And it was planted on the day he was born, on the 25th of May, 1753. John Crosby, the second Lord Glendor, was a member of the House of Lords in the Irish Parliament in Dublin. He was a Privy Councillor and served as Master of the Rolls. Now, following the Act of Union, which abolished the Dublin Parliament and united the Irish Parliament with that of London, he sat in Westminster in the House of Lords as one of the 28 representative Irish peers. On his death in 1815, the titles Earl of Glendor and Viscount Crosby of Ardfert became extinct. Now, his tree survived him by just over another quarter of a century, until January 1842, when the Kerry Evening Post noted, the Kerry Evening Post was a newspaper, it noted that it had fallen victim to a dreadful storm which wreaked havoc in the princely domain of Ardfert Abbey in January 1842. It noted that at that time that no less than 98 of the ancestral elms have been torn up by the roots. Among this number is the Patriarch of the forest, well known as Lord Glendor's tree, having been planted on the day of that nobleman's birth. Now, the mansion house at Ardfert was burned down during the Civil War, and very little now remains of the historic domain of trees. Between Lixna and the Stole, there is an avenue of lime trees leading up to Ballyhorgan House. And these were planted sometime between 1812 and 1843 by Captain William Richard Hillard. And they're almost cathedral-like, rising to a great height. The avenue was laid out in a formal manner with a line of trees either side of the approach road to the house, each planted approximately 21 feet apart and directly opposite one another. Now, this avenue of trees has no equal anywhere in North Kerry and perhaps even in the county as a whole, which makes it unique. And also, what is unique about it is that it's made of one species of tree. There are many of the other avenues leading up to the great houses were of, this is the avenue again leading up to Ballyhorgan House. Many of the other avenues leading up to the great houses of Kerry were of mixed planting. So you would have oak, beech, lime and sycamore. And this is the case at Collisand's house in Oak Park in Tralee. The last of these, Morris, one of the family actually, Morris Fitzgerald Collisand's of Oak Park, fought with the Royal Fusiliers in the First World War, and he was killed in 1917 out of the front. His body was never brought back, and he lies buried out there. But tradition holds in Tralee that sometime after his death, and just after the end of the war, he was seen walking the avenue at Collisand's house dressed in an army uniform. Now, outside Tralee, you have Ballyseedy Castle, which was the home of the Blennerhassetts. And they planted thousands of trees in their domain during the 19th century. It was noted in January 1832 that Arthur Blennerhassett of Ballyseedy had planted thousands of Scotch fir, spruce, oak, sycamore, beech, silver fir, birch, alder and larch in his domain. There was a tree in Ballyseedy known as the Colonel's Tree, and it was noted as growing there in 1872. However, its location is now long forgotten. The domain of Ballyseedy now forms part of Ballyseedy Wood, which was saved from destruction by a passionate group of local people when it was threatened by the construction of a dual carriageway in the 1990s. The route of the new road was planned to go through Ballyseedy, which was a special area of conservation. And there was also an alder ash alluvial woodland, which was protected by the Habitats Directive. Now, money to protect this site was being sent from Europe, which also financed the construction of the road, which was set to go straight through the wood. And in the words of one of those who worked to save it for future generations to enjoy, what Europe was saving with one hand, it was destroying with the other. The group succeeded in their quest, and Ballyseedy Wood is now a valued public amenity. It extends over 80 acres and is the last surviving stretch of deciduous woodland in North Kerry. Now, running through the wood is the original avenue leading to Ballyseedy Castle, and there are many fine examples of large beeches, oaks, and a number of yew trees by what is known as the Court Road. On the western side of the wood, on privately owned agricultural land, is Monument Wood. This takes its name to a monument erected to Arthur Blennerhassett, who was born in 1779 and died at Bath in 1815. This monument was erected with that inscription on this hillock in the early 19th century, and a grove of beech, oak, and sycamore trees were planted around it. Now, this monument was displaced by vandals in the 1970s, and it was one of a number of memorials in monument wood erected by the Blennerhassetts. Some of the monuments were erected in memory of their dogs, and there was also a monument in memory of those who fought from the family in the First World War, and also all those from the area who were killed. One of the Blennerhassetts and the last of the family to reside at Ballyseedy was Hilda Blennerhassett. She was the daughter of Arthur Blennerhassett and Nesta Fitzgerald, who was the daughter of the Knight of Glyn. Hilda served as a nurse during the First World War and was awarded the Mon Star. Now, the story is told that during World War II, there was no coal, and it was a very bad winter. So she opened up Ballyseedy Woods to locals so that they could go in and cut timber. However, a gate was left open, and the cattle strayed into a field near the castle called Ardbawn, where one of them ate a branch of a yew tree and was killed, because yew is poisonous to livestock. So that brought an end to the opening of the wood for timber. The last family I'm going to talk about tonight are the Knights of Kerry, and the names of their residences, such as the Grove in Dingle and Woodford in Listowel, hints at the love of tree planting among this family for generations. So Robert Fitzgerald, the 17th Knight of Kerry, served as an MP in the Irish Parliament in Dublin, and he resided in a thatched mansion at Ballinruddery outside Listowel. This thatched mansion overlooked the River Feel, and there were many, many plantations of trees which are still there to this day in Ballinruddery, which were planted by Robert and his son Maurice, the 18th Knight, who was also an MP. He was an MP in both Dublin and the Westminster Parliaments. There were many lime trees, copper beeches, there are cypress trees out there, a great many trees which are a huge asset really to the whole area, and they're hundreds of years old. Travel writers in the 1800s noted the plantations of trees initiated by both men, and Thomas Moore, Ireland's national poet, noted the beauties of the avenue leading to the Knight of Kerry's house at Ballinruddery when he walked along the avenue in 1824. It was in the 19th century, it was known as the Green Bowers, and it was a favourite walk of the townspeople of Listowel thanks to the kindness of the Knights of Kerry. It also inspired poetry, with the blind poet of North Kerry, D.C. Hennessy, writing a number of poems about the green groves of Ballinruddery. Robert was an avid planter of trees, and a number of his letters actually survive, in which he was gifting apple plants of a particular variety in Kerry to friends such as the Duke of Bedford. And there was a famous variety of apple tree grown in North Kerry at the beginning of the 19th century called the Catty Gay, which means, in polite terms, the droppings of the goose. And this was a famous cider-producing apple tree. And it was noted at that time growing at Ballyhorgan House, the home of William Hillard, which we saw earlier, in the early 19th century. Robert's grandson, this is Ballinruddery Castle and the site of the thatched mansion house of the Knights of Kerry. So Robert's grandson, Peter Fitzgerald, lived at Glenleam House in Valentia, and he continued the tree planting exploits of his forefathers on the family estate in Valentia Island. Not only did he bring the world to Valentia through his promotion of the transatlantic telegraph cable, he also imported plants and trees from across the globe to adorn his gardens at Glenleam House on the northwestern side of the island. The microclimate in Valentia afforded by the Gulf Stream meant species associated with warmer climes could survive in the normally hostile environment of the Irish weather. The Knight is said to have been the first person in Ireland to grow the Kerry fuchsia at his Glenleam garden, from where it escaped into the hedgerows of the Evora and Dingle peninsulas. A Chilean myrtle tree was among the types of trees Peter grew at Glenleam, And in the 1950s, when the house and gardens were owned by Colonel Richard Uniacke and his wife, a variegated seedling was found in the garden, which was cultivated by a nursery in Cornwall and sold as a new variety called Glenleen Gold. The tallest tree ferns in Europe, a species native to Australia, are also among the exotic plants still to be enjoyed in this historic garden, and also New Zealand cabbage trees. There was a cypress tree which once grew at Glenleen, but now is sadly gone, which was a gift to the Fitzgerald family from Prince Arthur, the Duke of Connacht, who was a younger son of Queen Victoria. He was a very close friend of Maurice Fitzgerald, the 20th Knight of Kerry, Peter's son. And the Duke and Maurice had served together in the British Army during the mid-1800s. And in fact, Maurice had saved the Duke's life on one occasion. The pair were very close friends, and the Duke visited the Knights in Valentia. He also acted as godfather to one of Maurice's sons, Arthur. Then it is said that Maurice named one of the Duke of Connacht's two daughters, Patricia, in honour of Ireland's patron saint. So the trees, just to conclude then, that there's such a heritage and such a history associated with trees in County Kerry. The history of the kingdom is told through these trees, stretching way back to the time of the Earl of Desmond, all the way through to Charles Stewart Parnell, and right up to the present day. The trees which grow by the roadsides, fields, farms, mountains, and historical places of Kerry are a valuable part of our county's heritage. They're often unsung and overlooked and unappreciated. The history of the kingdom is alive in its trees. They are a living link to the past. So generations of people before us, as we have seen, had stood in the shade of these trees, and generations of people after us will do likewise. They should be treasured for that reason as an important part of our identity and cared for so that they will be continued to be enjoyed in the future. So thank you for listening. That's a long talk. I'm nearly an hour speaking. But what we'll do now is we can actually have comments and any questions if people have them.